Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to, unfortunately, another one of those sad shows, those ones that we don't like doing, but unfortunately, when we lose our favorite rock stars and favorite musicians, it really is a good idea to kind of pay them respects and talk about them. And today we're here to talk about the late, great Peteway, otherwise formerly known as Peter Frederick Way, from, of course, the great UFO, also from Wasted, Mogwai. Pete was just an incredible musician, songwriter, character, beloved by many, a guy who had a, at times really difficult life, but he overcame a lot of things in his life to contribute so much to the world of hard rock and heavy metal over the years. And absolutely, one of those guys, him and his Gibson Thunderbird bass and his checkered or striped pants, just a guy that, he had the look, he had the attitude, he had all the charisma, and just so many musicians over the years have just talked about what a great, funny guy Peteway always was. So he passed away yesterday at the age of 69 due to complications from an accident that happened to him a couple months back. So apparently it's been a rather troublesome last couple of months for him, and he passed away with his wife and family by his bedside. And rest in peace, Peteway. Born in England, Enfield, Middlesex, August 7th, 1951. He leaves us on August 14th, 2020. And sadly, not long after Paul Chapman, not long after Paul Raymond. So here you have, all these kind of classic UFO members who have one by one been leaving us. And just truly sad, a band that I love quite a bit. And there he is right there. Band that I love quite a bit and have for most of my life. And it's just sad to see, members of your favorite band, one of your favorite bands, just kind of falling by the wayside. And but a great career nonetheless. So, and I urge everybody, and now's a perfect time if you haven't read this to read it. A Fast Ride Out of Here, Confessions of Rock's Most Dangerous Man by Peteway. This is a book that I read about a year ago. Fantastic book. And again, with all of the wit and humor coming directly from the man himself, talking about his life, talking about all the great bands and lineups and albums, and all the bad times, right? So he's pretty frank here about his descent into drug and alcohol dependency and addiction for all those years. But the stories, the camaraderie with his fellow musicians, and a fantastic storyteller that anybody you either talk to who knew him or things you read about people who knew him and were surrounded by him, just being around Peteway was at times he was kind of like hard rock's version of Keith Moon. Could you imagine Keith Moon and Peteway hanging out together at a party? Probably pretty crazy. Always kept everybody entertained, always keeping people laughing. He lived every day like it was going to be his last. And, one of those guys that had lived a really full life and experienced probably everything he ever wanted to. But 69, still pretty young. So let's talk a little bit about the musical legacy of Peteway. So again, co-founder of the band UFO. These guys, UFO popped up in the very, very early 70s. These UFO and UFO 2. The very early beginnings, kind of space rocky band trying to figure out their sound, kind of psychedelic, kind of bluesy, lots of psychedelia floating around their music. It wasn't until a couple of years later where they hooked up with a young 15-year-old guitar phenom in the German band The Scorpions while they were touring with them over in Germany. They convinced Michael to come on over to their side to join UFO, what would become the classic lineup of UFO, alongside Andy Parker on drums, eventually Paul Raymond on keyboards. So you had Phil Mogg, Peteway, Michael Schenker, Andy Parker, Paul Raymond eventually, and then when Schenker leaves, you had Paul Chapman. So those are the key UFO members. So Phenomenon was the really first album with that lineup that really started to get them noticed, right? So, of course, you've got classic tracks on here like Doctor Doctor and Rock Bottom All right, Queen of the Deep, Crystal Light, Oh My, a lot of really great songs. Good bluesy, heavy rock. But of course, it's with these albums, the next four, where I think the Pete and the band really started to take off, and the songwriting really started clicking. Of course, you got Force It with Let It Roll, Shoot Shoot, Out in the Street, Mother Mary. You've got No Heavy Petting, right, with Natural Thing, I'm a Loser. You've got the wonderful Lights Out. Of course, the great title track, Too Hot to Handle. Let's take a good close look at the guys in the band. Okay, there you see Pete all the way on the end there, standing next to Michael Schenker, Phil Mogg, Annie Parker, Paul Raymond. The band right at this point in time, probably at the height of their powers. Okay, and then of course my favorite, Obsession. Okay, Only You Can Rock Me, Pack It Up and Go, all sorts of great songs on there. And then perhaps one of the greatest live albums, hard rock live albums of all time. Okay, Strangers in the Night. It actually won our kind of live album battle that we had like the second half of last year, right? That went on for months and months and months, and all you guys voted this as your favorite live album of all time. Iconic. You could just see Pete running around the stage with the button-down shirt, the cut-off sleeves, the checkered pants, that Thunderbird bass, just sweaty head, sometimes wearing a scarf or a necktie or something like that. It's an iconic look that's been copied many times over the years. Schenker would leave the band, Paul Chapman would come in. Of course, you got No Place to Run. You've got The Wild, The Willing, and The Innocent. A lot of other very solid UFO albums to follow. He would also branch off, right? He would leave the band for a few years, and this is kind of like one of the biggest what ifs ever, but went to go put a band together with Fast Eddie Clark from X of Motorhead, the band Fastway, but then due to all sorts of contractual and legal limitations and issues that came up, could not stay in the band, okay, and continue on with them. So the Fast Eddie Clark, Pete Way, Fastway, that was the original concept of the band, along with Jerry Shirley on drums. Couldn't kind of do that, right? And he wound up going instead and putting together the band Wasted, another very fine band with a good handful of really good albums. Also, another great band too during that time period where UFO was kind of in limbo. The Mogwai band, so Phil Mogg and Pete Way. Okay, along with a bunch of other players and bass and guitars and drums and what have you. On drums and guitars. Couple really solid albums there as well, which, for a lot of people are pretty much UFO albums, right? Before UFO with the name got back together. So and his bass playing, rock solid, and his songwriting, really strong. It's like you had a couple of really capable songwriters in UFO. You had Pete and Phil and, Schenker while he was in the band, contributing different styles. I think, Pete was more from the old school good time rock and roll. He had like a punk edge to some of his compositions, okay, some of the arrangements that he would help put together, whereas, Phil was always coming more from a kind of a storytelling, like personal storytelling aspect in the songs. And just a rock solid bass player. He was not one of those guys that lead bass players. He just was always just cranking down a heavy bottom end. I do want to show some pictures from this book, kind of give you a little idea of the man. What else we got here? Yeah. There he is, iconic. Look at that. The suspenders, no shirt, those iconic pants, tossing the bass up high. Here he is. This is one of my favorite pictures of him. Here he is, hanging out, having a drink with Mr. Bon Scott. Okay, because of course AC/DC and UFO toured together quite a bit early on. This was actually taken at the Hammersmith Odeon, February 7th, 1980. 12 days later, Scott was dead. Okay, so both those guys, two peas in a pod, and that's the type of guy Pete was. He hung out with the wild crowd. He was always known as one of those wild guys, always looking for the next party. But one of those guys that, and here he is with another guy. Here he is with Ozzy, right? Pete kept the company of all the guys who were known as the wild and crazy guys. Some additional photographs here. Just man, this is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, you really need to. And yeah, just it's amazing. You look, you at times like this where you lose these, these treasured musicians that you grew up listening to, and yeah, you realize kind of like your own mortality, because you look at, he was 69. I mean, I'm not that much younger than him, and it's like you kind of grew up with these rock stars, with these musicians, and how much they affected and enriched your life, and then they're leaving us when they you think, well, but they still should have more time left on this earth, right? And again, and I'm not even sure what the accident was, but apparently it was pretty bad, and he's been suffering for the last couple of months. So I'm just happy that his suffering has ended. And would it have been nice to have seen maybe one last little reunion with the classic UFO lineup, but of course Paul's not around anymore. Yeah, would have been nice. He had Pete was not really a part of the touring UFO lineup for almost the last decade, if not more than that, due to a lot of visa issues and things like that. But and I never had the chance to see them with him on bass, unfortunately. That's kind of one of my, in kind of preparing to do this show this morning, thinking about this since I heard the news late yesterday. Never got the chance to see Pete on stage with UFO. That sucks. But, I got lots of video memories. I've got all the recorded work. I read the book, so I've heard the stories. I may just reread this book again now that this is kind of, fresh and just happened. But, yeah. Peteway, gone way too soon at age 69, one of the preeminent hard rock bass players and just all-around characters in the business. Age 69, rest in peace, Mr. Way. You've given us a lot of great music to treasure for the rest of our lives here on this earth. So I know you're up there with Tonka and with Mr. Raymond, hopefully creating some new music, probably hanging out with Lemmy as well. And Bon Scott, they're all up there having a big jam session right now, and that's the way it should be. So maybe one day I'll be able to come up and see that in person, right? So this is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Rest in peace, Peteway. We love you. Take care, everybody. I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.